Hi, it's Juliet and welcome to my studio. Today I'm going to show you how to make a pair of bumblebee beads on a mandrel for beads of courage. So the glass that we're going to need is an opaque yellow, a finely pulled black stringer, some white stringer, and a transparent color. I'm going to use a transparent amber. So the tools that we're going to need is a marvering pad, and I have a brass marvering pad that is sitting on a candlestick holder I got at a craft shop. We're going to need some sort of a tool for making creases. This is one of Corina's magic wands. You could use a knife or any other type of thing with a sharp edge. And we're going to need a pair of tweezers, and I will be using the flat part up here to flatten the wings. Let's get started. Okay, I'm going to light my torch. Safety first. Make sure if you are using a lighter like I am that you store it safely away from flying hot glass as they can explode. So for beads of courage, I like to have thicker mandrels. It makes it easier for the children to string the beads. So I'm using a larger size mandrel. So make sure you're using a thicker mandrel. And you have to be sure that your bead holes are nice and puckered with no sharp edges. So what I'm going to do is wind two cylinders on the same mandrel, and I'm going to be working on two beads together at the same time. That'll help you to get them matched a little bit better. Working on two beads at the same time is a little bit more advanced. So if you're a beginner, you may want to just make them one at a time. If you're a more intermediate bead maker or advanced bead maker, it's good for heat control to work on two things at the same time. I especially like using yellow glass because its temperature is very easy to read. It gets darker as it cools down, and then it goes and turns lighter. So when it's molten, it's yellow, and it goes to this darker red stage. And you'll notice, as I'm working on the second one to the right, the bead on the left will start to get lighter and lighter in color. And it's easy to judge the temperature when I need to give it some heat just by looking at the color. So it's a good practice color. So I'm winding on the second cylinder and trying to get the footprint about the same size as the one on the left. Adding a little bit more insurance heat, and you'll notice how it's getting darker again. And I'm going to go back to the right one and continue building up the glass. After you've done a few of these, you sort of get an inherent feel for how long you can wait and work on one bead while the other one is slowly cooling off a little bit before you need to go back and give it a little bit more heat. Now I'm going to marver the one on the right a little bit more. So it looks like the one on the left is a little bit smaller diameter, so I will be adding a little bit more glass to the left one to try to build it up to match the one on the right. I'm going to basically put 3 rings on it that allow me to add it without entraining any air bubbles. And I can use heat to get it to flow into the base glass. And when I marver it, I'm going to marver it on the edge of the marvering pad so that the shaped bead on the right doesn't touch anything. You can also marver it on a tool like Corina's magic wand, which I'm using, or a stump shaper, or any other graphite pad or whatever you like to use for marvering. And the edges can be cleaned up in between by using one of your tools. Okay, so those are fairly well matched both in size, width, and diameter. So now what we're going to do is add a ring on the outer edges in black, which will be the head of the bumblebee. And I put it on the outside because in the middle, since you're going back and forth, it tends to get a lot of heat, and we'll be putting details on that, and I don't want it to melt in too much, so it stays a little bit cooler, a little more protected on the outer edge. So that's why I've chosen to do that. Plus, when I add the black here, I want to add a little bit more to the inner edge. So I'm adjusting my mandrel and going in the inner edge so that I can cover up that yellow. And if you're working on the outside, it's much more easy to just geometrically and physically get to that face of the bead. So there, I put a wrap on, and now I'm going to add some more glass in a little bit. I'm being careful not to touch my mandrel. I want to let the glass naturally flow down and cover up the yellow rather than going up to the mandrel. You end up with cleaner bead hole this way. So now I'm going to heat it from this edge, and I'm heating up the mandrel as well, and that will allow the glass to soften and flow towards the mandrel. And then I'm going to heat it from this direction a little bit and sort of let it flow in. Add a little bit of insurance heat on the left. Now I might marver this a little bit more, trying to keep that distinction between where the yellow is and then where the black is, and shape it up a little bit. And you can see how I have a nice bead hole in there, and it has completely flown towards the mandrel and covered the yellow, which is what I want. Let's get a bit of insurance heat. The left side was getting a little light colored there. Get a bit of heat in it. Okay, so now we're going to work on the left one. And again, I'm going to rotate my mandrel at an angle to concentrate the heat on that edge, and that will allow the glass to flow towards the mandrel. Incidentally, when you're dipping the mandrels, you need to make sure you have a long enough length to actually hold two beads and still have a bit of a gap in between the two of them. I'm going to touch up this edge here using my marver. All right, notice the right side was getting a little light color, so I'm going to add a bit of heat there. So the next step is we're going to use a black stringer and apply a spiral, and that will become the stripes in the bumblebee. So since I'm right-handed, I want to spiral from left towards the right, so I will start with this guy here. Just touch down and spiral on around the edge. Now, you need to find the sweet spot, as they call it. For me, I'm below the flame and a little bit to the right. Now I want to melt that in. Notice the right side's getting a little lighter color, so let me add a bit of heat here. Melt that in on the left. If I need to scooch something before it's melted in, it's pretty easy to come in with a tool like with a sharp edge, like the magic wand or any other kind of tool that you usually use for detail work. You can kind of scooch the lines over and even them out a little bit if you need to. Marver that in. Let's get a little bit of heat on the right. When you go to put down your stringer, if the base bead is a little hotter, it can be easier to work. I'm going to touch down and spiral it on. Again, I am below the flame and a little bit to the right. Let me see if I need to scooch anything a little bit to even up my lines. Looks good. Let me melt that in. Marver it a little bit. So I'm not marvering the black bumblebee head, I'm marvering just right up to that edge. Add a little bit of heat to the left bead, maybe touch that up a little bit. Next part is adding the wings. So we need to decide where we're going to put them. And we're going to be working on 4 wings. So we want to put 2 wings at one position for one bead, and then we want to rotate the mandrel a bit and put it in another position for the second bead. The reason we do that is otherwise you have difficulty getting into the 2 beads with your tweezers. I generally put the beginning or the end of my spiral on the bottom. So decide which end looks a little ickier, and I'll put that on the bottom. So looking at my left bead, this side down here looks a little icky, so I'll flip it over up here and I'll call that my top. So that means I want to put one wing here and one wing there. Let me get a little bit of insurance heat on the right, a little bit on the left. What I'm going to do is melt up a gather in my transparent amber rod. So once I have a good size gather, I want to heat up the landing pad on the bead where I want the wing to go so that it will adhere well to it. I put that gather down, flame cut, and you'll notice I have it hanging below the bead, and that is so that gravity will pull it down as it's cooling a little bit. So while that's cooling, I'm melting another gather. Then once it's solidified a little bit, I'm warming up the landing spot and putting another wing dot on the body. Okay, so while that's firming up, now we're going to go to the other bumblebee on the right. And I want to decide where his wings are going to go. And again, I want to try to balance it so that they're not perfectly in line with the left one. That way I have room to get my tool in there. So, you know, you've got 180 degrees to play with in here. So looking at everything, I'm going to put one wing right here. So I'm getting the base bead hot. I've got my gather. I'm going to press it on, let flame cut it, and let gravity pull it down. Now he's cooling off a little bit below the flame while I'm melting my next gather. I'm going to get the landing spot hot so it adheres well. Touch it down, flame cut it, and let gravity pull it down. So while the right side is cooling, I'm going to put a little bit of insurance heat back into my left bumblebee. Now from here on, when I'm adding heat, I probably want to concentrate it in between the two wings. So while I've been doing that, I've been gathering up another little gather on my amber. I'm going to touch it down and melt it onto one of the wings. Now this time, I want to make sure it adheres well. It sort of melts down and flows down into the other one. So I'm going to put it on the top side so gravity pulls it down a little bit. Get it on there melted. You need to apply heat both sides so that it can flow into the base landing pad we put on there before. And I'm going to put that on the top. Let gravity pull it down, let it cool off a little bit. I've got my gather prepared, and let gravity pull that down. So now I think I've got enough glass for both of them. So I'm going to take a breath and add a little bit of insurance heat. Probably want to add a little bit of heat to the mandrel beyond the outside. That will help keep the black heads of the bumblebees warm so they don't crack. Okay, so let's see how we did here. So I've got these two beads here so I can get my tool in to squeeze, and then I can get my tool in there to squeeze. So I did okay. All right, so let's take this first one, and I'm going to heat this from both sides, and then what I'm going to do is flatten it with the root of my tweezers. So I have a bigger area to flatten. There we go. Then I'm going to heat up the other side, the other wing. Want to get it hot from both sides. I'm going to go in there with the root of my tool and squeeze it. All right, let those cool a bit. I'm going to work on the second bumblebee on the right. This first wing here, go in, squeeze it. Take the second one, get it hot, squeeze it. That one didn't squeeze out quite as much. I didn't either squeeze enough or it wasn't quite as hot. So let's get them to match a little better. There we go. All right, so now I'm going to put a little bit of insurance heat along the mandrel into the body of the bead. And the next step is to put a little divot in the wing so that it's suggestive of two wings. So I'm going to heat up just the tip of the wing and take the sharp edge of my magic wand and press in. And that makes that little divot. I'm going to heat up the other wing, just the tip of it from both sides. Take my tool and poke it in. Let's go back to the right bumblebee. Let's take one of the wings, heat it up, and press it in. You can look at it and decide, see, this front one is smaller and this back one is bigger. So when I press the second guy, I want to press it in the same place so that the front one is smaller and the back one is bigger, so they sort of match. Now I want to add another bit of insurance heat to my bee body. And if I need to, sometimes when you press it, it gets a little distorted. You can go in and flatten it out again with your tool. If you completely bugger it up, you can melt it down and repress the whole wing and redo that little divot. But these look pretty good. So next up, we're going to put the eyes on. So you need to decide which is the top, where are the eyes going. So this guy here, I like this edge. It's going to put down 2 large white dots on the black section. Those will become the eyes. And the guy on the right, I think I like this side for the top too. So I'm going to put 2 eye dots, more or less center them on that black section. And then I like to press them down and flatten them out a little bit. At this point, you can judge them for size. If you need to add a little bit of glass to one or the other to balance it, you can do that. I got lucky here. They look fairly well matched. Put a little bit of insurance heat in the bee bodies, and I'm putting the heat in on the underside so I'm not risking over melting my eye dots. I'm going to take a fine stringer and put a dot in the center for the pupil. There we go. So I'm going to melt those in so they don't break off. Want to melt them in slowly. Add a little bit of insurance heat to the underside, out on each of the wings. Make sure they're attached well. Got some good heat in them. Polish out any of the chill marks. A little bit of insurance heat near the bead holes so that we have nice puckers and we don't accidentally chip them, getting them off the mandrels and cleaning the bead poop out later. So there we go. A pair of bumblebees for the kids.
Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed one of these Lampwork bead tutorials. Be sure to check out the full playlist to see all of the different Lampwork tutorials we have, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so that way you can look back at them later and catch up on any new videos that come out in the future. Thanks!